So, welcome to this lecture series. This is lecture number 3, continuation of mutation breeding in crop improvement. Uh, so, this is going to be the last lecture in relation to crop improvement program. Uh, Now, we have already seen the radiation, type of radiation that are normally used in mutation breeding in our atomic energy setup, which is mainly ionizing radiations. So, uh, for ionizing radiations, we should know how they affect, what is their mode of action is very important to know as background as to how they are causing these mutations. Now, as far as radiation, when it interacts with a living organism or a living cell, there are two types of uh, interactions. One is the direct interaction, which is or direct action, as it is called. Uh, it may be called as direct physical action because it's direct deposition of energy on the molecule, and it causes because of the direct deposition on the molecule, deposition of energy on the molecule, there is a direct effect uh, which may damage the DNA or molecule. Now, this direct effect is directly proportional to the size of the molecule. So, bigger the molecule, more is the damage that is experienced. So, DNA being the largest molecule, followed by, say, RNA or proteins or lipids. So, in that order, you will see the damage is also big or high uh, as far as physical damage is concerned on a molecule like DNA. The other uh, major action is because of the indirect effect um, of radiation, which may happen in the cell. And indirect effect largely happens because of the reactive free radicals which are generated, and this effect is mainly depending on the abundance of the molecule in cell, and water being the most abundant molecule in the cell, there's a lot of indirect effect caused by the ionization of water. So both direct and indirect effects collectively cause or inflict damage on the living cell. Each radiation is characterized by its ionization density, which is expressed in terms of linear energy transfer. So, as I told you, there are several sources of radiation which can be used for causing mutation. Uh, but there is a linear energy transfer quotient associated with each type of radiation. So more the LET, more the damage that it will cause. LET is the energy dissipated per unit length along the tracks of the ionizing particle as it moves along the living tissue. uh, it is the deposition of energy or dissipation of energy in its track till it is stopped, or till it passes through the uh, living material. Now, gamma, X rays, and beta are low LET radiations. Normally, these are wave kind of radiation which have low LET, whereas the heavier particulate radiation have you know high LET. So, low LET radiation, the ionization events caused by them are sparse. They are comparatively low along the track of the ionizing unit. Whereas, heavy particles, for example, alpha particles or fast neutrons, are high LET radiations. Therefore, ionization events along the path are dense and high. Further, ionization is the process, as you might have already learned now, is knocking out of an electron from an atom. Now, when an electron is knocked out, it can be trapped in a polar surrounding, uh, you know, and a radical ion can be created, and both unstable and reactive. They can be, uh, they are very reactive. They have very low lifetime. They are highly unstable, so they are therefore they are very reactive. In aqueous solution, if there is a lot of water around, free electrons, they polarize several water molecules. That means they uh, give that negative energy to uh, polar water molecules. That means one electron can hydrate several, I mean, a hydrated electron, E aqueous, one electron can have several water molecule around it. Now, free radicals generated in solution combine with each other to form stable products. Many times, they die down amongst themselves, and form stable products. Um, as for definition, a free radical is a reactive species capable of independent existence that contains one or more unpaired electrons. So there are certainly long-lived free radicals which have an unpaired electron, and there are very short-lived radicals also, which may immediately, react with their surroundings. So there, as you know, they could be H dot or O2 dot. There, when this dot is there, that means it's a free radical. And if there is a charge associated with it, for example, if positive charge is associated with a, say, X dot plus, that is radical cation. If it is negative charge associated with the radical, then it is radical anion. Radicals can also be formed if covalent bond is broken to leave one electron from the bonding pair on each atom. So it's in case of homolytic fission, that means equally breaking. So each atom will get one electron, and a radical can be created. If oxygen, for example, oxygen is a biradical is present, it reacts readily with radiation induced free radicals to form peroxy radicals. In solid state molecular environment, uh, the its movement of the radicals is restricted. So if you have dry materials, the radical damage will be less. But if you have you know liquid material or gaseous material, then radicals move quite fast. The higher the water content in irradiated target, the greater the related damage. So it's very important that you can expect, if you soak seeds, or if you have a lot of water uh, in a biological material, then damage is going to be high, and accordingly the radiation doses can be adjusted. Now, lethal action of ionizing radiations are very important, because we should know that, after actually, before undertaking any experiment, you create a survival curve of a organism or living cells, or even in, say, microorganisms. So you know that, what is the D10 value. That means what is the dose that kills almost 90% of the cells. You can actually measure the loss of reproductive ability of the cell. And in biological terms, it is called mitotic activity. That means the cell is not able to divide. See, mitotic activity is the indicator that cell is living and dividing. Uh, on the other hand, we have meiotic activity, which is a division which happens in germ cells. In germ cells, meiotic activity brings down the number of cells from diploid to a haploid state. So in germ cells, it's only one set of chromosome, not the two sets of chromosomes. But the loss of life is when the uh, cell division ability of the organism is lost, or cell division is no longer taking place. Mitotic activity is not taking. Now, it was Mueller and Stadler in 1920s. They found that X-rays, you know, they cause some phenotypic mutations in Drosophila, uh, that is fruit fly, and then it was realized that X-rays can cause some genetic changes. Although genes were not known at that time, but it was known that it is creating some changes in the phenotypic behavior of uh, these organisms. Uh, these were ascribed to DNA damages in 50s. So in 50s, when we learned that there is genetic material in every cell in the form of DNA, then it was realized that all these phenotypic mutations, they have happened because of changes in DNA caused by X-rays. Chromosomal aberrations were detected in dividing cells at anaphase or as micronuclei. So there were a lot of uh, studies done in what is happening to the cell after they are bombarded with ionizing radiation. So they observed that there were chromosomal aberrations, means the DNA in the chromosome was getting hit and getting knocked out, or many times they were it again rewound itself to form say micronuclei. uh, so you found many changes that could happen when the cell were dividing, and it resulted in interphase death. That means cells could no longer multiply, and they just couldn't reproduce completely because of these changes or aberrations which were happening in chromosomes. When the effect of gamma rays and fast neutrons are compared, gamma ray treatment has greater biological effect, also called relative biological effectiveness. This is because uh, the relative biological effectiveness, uh, it is because of the penetration power that is associated with say gamma rays. We have more effectiveness of radiobiological effects. RBE is the ratio of biological effectiveness of one type of ionizing radiation relative to another, given the amount of absorbed energy. So if we are to see that related relative biological efficiency in X-rays, gamma rays, beta particles is considered as one, and in heavier particles, for example, neutrons of different energies, as it is saying, neutrons with less than 1 million electron volt of energy will be 2.5, whereas if you increase the energies of neutrons to 1 to 50 million electron volts, it will be 5. That means 5 times that of X-rays, gamma rays, or beta particles. Neutrons of higher than 50 million electron volts will be 2.5. I think it's should be, there's something wrong here. It should not be 2.5. It should be more. Maybe it's around 10. Whereas protons with alpha particles and heavy nuclei should be 20 times that of X-rays. This is, I think, this is 25. Later, I'm sure I'm trying to clarify this. Neutrons with 1 to 50 MeV is 5, and neutrons with more than 50 MeV is 25. Protons, alpha particles, heavy nuclei is around 20 in terms of RB compared to X-rays, gamma rays, and beta particles. I'll check it out and confirm in my next lecture what exactly this value is. Later, it became largely recognized that all organisms which often recover after irradiation and/or show DNA damages also possess a range of conserved biochemical activities responsible in restoring DNA to undamaged state. So, although uh, uh, cells or living organisms, when they are exposed to ionizing radiations, uh, there is an inherent ability to come back to the to the normal behavior, unless a very high lethal dose is given. So at sublethal doses, every organism has a ability to come back to its regular state of reproduction. So this gave rise to the theory that there is a DNA repair taking place inside, and which is later on proved how it happens. There are different repair mechanisms today known to scientists, and to some extent DNA damage is repaired by every cell. Unrepaired breaks are significantly higher in fast neutron irradiation than after gamma rays. So, this is a common sense that fast neutrons, which are having energy as well as weight with it, will have much more damage compared to gamma rays, and they lead to a lot of cluster damage that will be, when they dissipate energy. Uh, there's a lot of damage taking place compared to gamma rays in case of neutrons, because they are particulate heavy, and therefore on the top, or to start with, there will be a lot of damage, and a lot of tissue damage happens in case of heavy particles. No, once we know the kind of radiation that we are dealing with for as a mutagenizing agent, because we have to make a choice, like which mutagenic agent, which radiation, which ionizing radiation we have to use as mutagenic agent, depending on the type of tissue that we are going to use and the characteristics of the ionizing radiation that we know. On that basis, we make our selection. But whenever we do that, dosimetry is very important, because we should know, for any experiment to be reproducible, we should know that the kind of dose that tissue has received, and so that we can repeat that. And so dosimetry becomes very important in all mutation experiments. In fact, in any experiment that involves use of radiation. So what is dosimetry? Dosimetry is method for the quantitative determination of absorbed dose in the target material, and uh, it is physical. uh, you can quantify this absorbed dose. Absorbed dose is the energy which is deposited in a unit mass of matter because of interaction of radiation with this matter. So it's a uh, physical entity which is interacting with a chemical entity, and we can make out what changes it has caused in the matter, and because of that absorption of a physical entity into chemical entity, the kind of changes it has caused in the matter, they can be quantified. In many practical cases, absorbed dose is not measured directly but calculated from the measured number of ions produced in air. So it can also be done in air by the number of ionizations which it has caused in air. Measurement of this kind are done with ionization chambers, and quantity measured in this way called exposure. So if you are just doing um, measurement in air, we call it as exposure dose. When we are doing it is in actual tissue or in a material or a chemical solution, which is normally used for dosimetry experiments, then it is called absorbed dose. So normally there is some difference between the exposure dose and the absorbed dose. Absorbed dose, or briefly also called the dose or D of any ionizing radiation, is defined as the amount of energy absorbed per mass of irradiated matter at the point of interest. It was generally accepted that radiation absorbed dose, earlier it was called radiation absorbed dose or RAD, best meets this demand. Therefore, it's common and convenient to describe radiation effect on the biological targets in terms of dose effect relationship. So this was called radiation absorbed dose, and there was dose and effect relationship. So more the dose, more the effect that you will see in the given material. But nowadays we commonly use a SI unit, which is not rad but which is called gray, and it is named after a scientist, Gray. Uh, and 1 gray is equivalent to 1 joule of energy absorbed in 1 kilogram of material. One gray, uh, 1 gray is equivalent of 1 joule of energy absorbed in 1 kilogram of material. And in terms of earlier unit of rad, which you might see in literature, 1 gray is equivalent of 100 rads. So 100 rads is equivalent to a present day unit which is used as gray, 1 gray. 1 gray is equal to 100 rads. Absorbed dose is independent of material. However, irradiation of two different materials under exactly equal conditions will generally lead to different absorbed doses in two materials. So it depends on the conditions that you have in different materials. So irradiation of two different materials under exactly conditions will generate. It's not very homogeneous effects. The two materials uh, which are absorbing radiation, especially in biological material, you might find absorbed those differences, and many times small differences in materials may reflect in the dose uh, that is seen. So, for example, one very important parameter is moisture, and uh, the more the moisture, more absorb those probably you will see. So dosimetry systems have been used in laboratories very frequently, are physical ionization chambers, which are also threshold detectors. Then chemical determination, that means chemical yield, and many times we use this ferrous ammonium sulfate, which is called Fricke solution. Or we can also use some biological dosimeters, changes which take place in cell at different doses can also be measured. So there could be both physical, chemical, and biological determinants of dosimetry. Uh, Now coming to once we are having this kind of background of radiation, how uh, they affect the material, and how to measure the dose that we are giving to a tissue or material, then we look at uh, now we are coming closer to our plants or that we have to use. So in a biological setup, especially in agricultural side, we have to uh, we have different kinds of target materials. For example, whole plants could be target materials, and if you are targeting whole plants, then we have to take recourse to things like gamma field or gamma greenhouses, where we can keep X-ray machines or gamma sources in the center, and around that source of irradiation, we can keep our whole plants, which which are normally potted, or they can be even in hydroponic systems. But the most useful target plant material to crop improvement program are seeds. Now, seeds are very easy to handle. First of all, seeds are available as dried materials. They can be kept stored for a long, long time, especially under airtight conditions. They can be kept in vacuum or refrigerated conditions for a long time. And also you can manipulate the damage or effect of radiation in seeds by changing their moisture content, changing their temperature. So they are very easy to handle and very attractive to work on, and also give you results very quickly, especially when you are looking for results in the progeny or in the next generations when you grow them. Uh, the other materials which have been used are pollen. Now, pollen, as you know, as I've already told you, that pollen is a germ cell. It contains single set of chromosome. It's a gamete. So, uh, there are advantages of using such cells, because you know what you're dealing with. First of all, such your information is almost half. We know you're dealing with homozygous set of genes, and they don't produce chimeras uh, when we grow or use pollen grains. And also, pollen grains are like single cells. They are amenable to even very low energy radiations like UV treatment, or even say electron beams, which are low energy electron beams, can be used for looking at the effect of pollens. Then meristems. Meristems are those parts of the plants which have dividing tissues, like buds in plants, or you have, for example, buds on potato tuber. Similarly, we have reduced stem on, say, onion. Now, these are points or places in a plant where cells can actively divide, and the generation of the entire plant can happen from meristems. So you can use meristems, especially for vegetatively propagated crops. After irradiation, you might grow them, and see, that you get mutations, and you get different phenotypic changes, or morphological changes. But these are chimeric. They are not very clear cut, that in next generation, whether you will get to see all those changes continuously. So many times these changes are not permanent, as in case of seeds or pollen. Now, plant cells and in vitro tissue culture. Also, it's possible to propagate plant cells in tissue culture, and these tissue culture cells can also be subjected to mutation. So you can carry out what is called as in vitro mutagenesis. You can, in vitro means in test tube. You can grow these tissue culture material, or they can be single cells, or they can be tissue culture, or culture tissue generated from meristems, and you can subject them to radiation. And you can also do in vitro screening of this, so you don't have to actually go to the field for testing the mutants. Of course, later on you can go to fields. For example, we have tissue culture banana, uh, and we have uh, you know uh, after growing them in the greenhouse, they are ultimately put in the field. So tissue culture plant cells, single I mean, just the suspensions, and the tissues can be exposed to radiation as a target material. uh, s- Now, treatments and conditions, if you know, irradiation dose and dose rate. Normally, these are, see, all higher organisms, plants and even animals, they are very susceptible to radiation. And, many of the plant material or seeds don't stand very high doses. So those between 100 gray to 1000 gray, that means 1 kilo gray, is good enough to see mutations in plant seeds. And dose rate between 60 to 7 gray per minute is normally, depending on the source, the dose rate will vary. What is the strength of uh, the radioisotope that we have, or in case of machine sources. So it can vary. In case of X-rays or electron beams, the dose rates are really very, very high. But when we are talking of gamma chambers, these are really low in terms of few gray per minute. Then acute versus chronic radiation. Now, in case of, for example, gamma field, this is a chronic type of radiation. So very low doses are given over a long period of time. The plants are growing um, in the field of radiation for a longer time. This is called chronic radiation. We have a lot of high background radiation areas in certain parts of the world, and in India, for example, in Kerala, where plants or some other life forms are growing in a higher radiation zone. So in gamma field also we create a radiation zone where radiation is much more than the background, and therefore this kind of radiation exposure is called chronic. But whereas if we are exposing seeds over a period of 1 hour, 2 hours, or so, then we are calling it as acute radiation dose. Then many times, recurrent irradiation treatments are done. That means you give small doses at different point of times. So that will be called recurrent irradiation. Of course, the radiation sensitivity of material is um, basically it varies, and it will be reflected in the form of say height, that is height that it will attain after say we have grown the material. So normally after radiation the seedling doesn't grow very happily. So you are uh, ending up with some seeds which may not grow, some seeds which will grow 50% of its original. And uh, this is based on, for example, if we keep 12 to 14% moisture, we may end up with different seedling heights. So radiation sensitivity of the material will vary. But besides the original property of the material to be sensitive to radiation, there are several dose modifying factors which can be used. For example, moisture, oxygen, temperature. If we vary them in the environment, we may see different response to radiation dose. Of course, the inherent part depends on the biological factors, for example, genetics. And in genetics, it is very important. There is an inherent ability of the cell to repair the DNA damage. So it may be different in different plants. There is something called nuclear volume, which is also important. Many plants have different volume. There are small differences in nuclear volume, which may also affect response to radiation. Also, the cell cycle state, like in which phase one the radiation is taking place. So when the cells are replicating, they are most sensitive, and when they are dormant, that means they are in interphase, they are not replicating rapidly. So rapidly replicating cells are much more susceptible to uh, effect of radiation than those quiescent or dormant cells. Um, and of course, what pre and post radiation treatments you have carried out will also affect, uh, like whether you have soaked the seeds, or after radiation, if you have put in water, allowed them to stay in water for some time, what is called as water holding recovery. So pre and post radiation treatments are also important to see the effects on plant materials. Now, normally, whenever you are going to do some experiment with say, mutation breeding, first thing that you need is There are a number of things that you require to carry out a simple experiment in a laboratory. So you need seeds, you need water permeable bags, you need paper clips or stapler, desiccators, then you need 60% glycerol distilled water mixture, which is just to manipulate the humidity. A gamma cell or a gamma chamber should be available. Of course, to measure seedling heights and things like that, you need certain things. You need a greenhouse or a laboratory facility. Also, um, trays. You don't have to go to the field immediately, but you in the laboratory you need trays where you can put some soil or such material in which seeds can be grown. You can have sterilization systems available. Many times you need to sterilize many of these trays or equipments that are used, because we don't want things to be contaminated with the fungal or bacterial spores or bacterial growth. Uh, so, these are like pots, potting mix, which are normally required for growing. So, for any experiments to be carried out on mutation breeding, these basic requirements are there in a uh, mutation lab. Uh, Now, for radiation mutagenesis, there are some kind of things which are ensured pre-hand. For example, seeds. Now, if you are using a seed material, you should see that it is genetically uniform. So this is ensured by selecting a variety which is well known, and we'll call it as a parent variety, because later on we'll have mutation progeny. So we'll have progeny which is mutated. So this should be genetically uniform. It should not be a mixture of two, three varieties which will respond differently to radiation. Representative of the genotype, like you should know what kind of genotype it is, which the, the genetics and plant breeding people know the kind of genotype that the seed has. It should be fairly dry, quiescent. Quiescent means they are dormant. If seeds are dormant, procedure required to breaking dormancy. Now, uh, as I told you, many times uh, seeds are so dormant that they don't easily grow in laboratory setup. So many times you have to break the dormancy, which could be normally done by increasing, say, moisture or temperature. Sometimes such seeds also need a little bit of cracking of the coat, seed coat, so that their dormancy can be broken. But many times dormancy is not governed by environment, but it is genetically controlled. So they are in a quiescent phase, but after some time, after that time gap is allowed, then seeds become, you know, they become active, or they become in a replicating stage. So we should see that quiescent or dormant seeds um, are not used. You can break the dormancy and then use them for mutation or for mutagenizing. Uh, Also, there should be good germination rate. Many times, some seeds have very poor germination rate. I don't know what exactly is behind this, but inherently the germination rate may not be 100%. It will always be something like 80%, 90%, sometimes even lower. So you should know what is the germination rate of the seed material that you have started with, uh, and have a water permeable seed coat. So if you are using a seed which has a water permeable seed coat, then it is easier for it to be used in an experiment, because we want fairly good damage to be caused in the DNA inside. It should. Uh, so one can, as I told you, can chemically or mechanically modify the seed coat, making it more permeable to moisture. Identify a gamma facility that offers radiation service. Uh, and of course, in BRC setup, there is no issue of getting it. You can get several of them, and you carry out a small experiment to look at the radio sensitivity. So what you do is you take 20 seeds and expose them each set to say 0, 150, 300, 450, 600, or 1 kilogram dose, and then look at their viability. How many of them out of 20 are germinating? So it will give you some idea of you know the lethal dose. You will have a survival curve uh, charted out, and then in what range you should work. So the ideal range is that you should get some 50% lethality, but the remaining 50% which germinate will show you differences in characters, and that's a good experiment to start with. Now these are the many times after irradiation one can store plant seeds at room temperature up to 4 weeks. You know, so you should not prolong this storage. It should be the material after irradiation should be not stored more than 4 weeks. For longer storage, if you want to, if there is, because many times after irradiation, seeds are taken back to the breeding place, or from universities. Material comes, it gets irradiated. So one has to take into account this period, that no longer than 4 weeks before you start doing experiments with it. Or if you have to use a longer period, then maybe you have to use airtight containers and low temperatures to reduce the metabolic activity. Because though seeds are not very actively multiplying tissues, but there is certainly some element of repair may start. So we may lose some mutations which might have been there, or some damage might have been repaired if we store longer and in under uncontrolled conditions. Uh, the planting of M1 seeds, that means after you have exposed to the mutagen, that in this case irradiation or radiation, we grow these mutations, these seeds in trays, sow in trays containing potted mix in greenhouse. Keep the sowing depth uniform. So it's important that when you sow, you keep depth of sowing in mind, and it comes with practice. There are no issues. People also grow these seeds in petri dishes. A small experiment can also be done in petri dish, where you can take wet filter paper and look at the germination. So normally sterile water is used uh, using this filter paper, and one would use sterile forceps to place these seeds or check the seedling height and things like that. Then you what you collect as far as the start experiment is germination percentage, which is very important parameter, and seedling height is another very important parameter. So you take this data, calculate the survival percentage, look at the fertility and sterility in M2 population. So once you grow them, then seeds will, this M1 will give further seeds which are collected, and these seeds are again sown, and then you look at that how many of them showed fertile behavior, that means they could multiply, and others which were sterile, which didn't have the multiplication ability. So this is how the and those which are fertile, which can grow, are definitely the material for the breeder. That means uh, this is the material which the breeder will look very carefully for phenotypic changes, and whether those phenotypic changes, that means the outward changes that he is looking at, whether he wants any of those changes to be used in further experiments. Now, if what we are looking at in a plant after exposing to ionizing radiation and having them mutated, we are looking at phenotypic characters. Now, what are phenotypic characters? For example, seedling development. You know how it is developing. What I mean, are there any changes in the development of seedlings, or whether there are changes in vegetative growth, reproductive growth, or inflorescence, um, or in their flowering pattern, or if there are any changes in the ripening of then there are genotypic mutations which are which could be epigenetic. That means epigenetic means they are related to some changes which are taking place in the methylation or demethylation of DNA. So DNA is intact, is supposed to be intact, but there are, the methylation pattern on DNA has changed. There is some bases which have been methylated, or which were methylated have become demethylated, or there could be extranuclear mutations. That means there are mutations which are not in the main chromosome, but in the chromosomes of, for example, in case of plants, we have the photosynthetic material where there are, plastosomes, where there are DNAs. Even in, say, mitochondria, there are DNAs. So in the chloroplast, which is responsible for green color and fixation of carbon dioxide, there also DNA is there. So this is extra chromosomal material. So these are also called extra nuclear mutations. So there could be epigenetic changes which relate to just methylation or demethylation of DNA. There could be extra chromosomal or extra nuclear mutations. That means these are mutations are taking place in organelles other than nucleus. Main DNA is in nucleus, whereas there is DNA also in mitochondria, also in chloroplast. So there could be also changes in those DNA. But what the breeder is mainly looking at is the genome mutations, the changes which are taking place in the main chromosomal set of the plant. And that is what is important. Of course, some of the extra nuclear mutations can come from the mother side, where, but in case of normally these chloroplasts and mitochondria may not be, going from one progeny to the next progeny. But the nuclear changes, the changes which are taking in the chromosomes which are there in the nucleus, are the ones which are transmitted from uh, this progeny to the next progeny. So these are called, they are also, different kind of mutations which are ploidy, which are the number of chromosomes. So these are called ploidy mutations or N mutations. That means N minus 1. That means the set of chromosomes has come down by minus 2 mutation. That means the whole chromosome has disappeared. These are called, or it has appeared, more number of chromosomes have appeared. So these are called ploidy mutations. Then there are chromosome mutations. That means chromosomes are intact, all chromosomes are there, but there are abnormal chromosomes. For example, aneuploidy. Aneuploidy is called some abnormality in the chromosomal set. There may be half of the chromosome disappearing, or one another chromosome, or new micronuclei appearing. Uh, There could be also chromosomal rearrangements. Sometimes one chromosome may get set of DNA from another chromosome, or the DNA in the chromosome changes its place from one side to another side, or what is called as rearrangement. There could be deletions. There could be just some part of DNA in chromosome has disappeared. There could be duplications. Many times, the genes, they duplicate. The set of DNA just uh, appears at two places. So such kind of changes can also happen. There could be inversions or religation. They could, it can cut, the piece can cut and join somewhere else. So religation of a piece in the original place, but after 180-degree rotation. That means the orientation of the piece of DNA changes, and that is called inversion. Or translocation, that means from one chromosome to another. Inter or intra, that means inter means in the same chromosome the DNA has changed place, or it has moved from one chromosome to another. And of course, I told you about extranuclear mutations uh, earlier. Now, gene mutations, when they happen, many times they're they can be called as missense. That means there is a change in the triplet code, the codons. These are the three nucleotides which govern the amino acid uh, type. So and there are codons for amino acids which are more than one set of codon may be there for single amino acid. So there may be a change taking place in a triplet codon, but amino acid is not affected, and this will be called as missense mutation. Whereas a nonsense mutation means a new triplet uh, creates a stop codon. That means DNA no longer is able to multiply because a stop codon is created. A codon which was earlier coding for an amino acid suddenly becomes a stop codon, and as a result, there is the protein that it was coding for amino acid that is no longer there. And silent mutations where changes have taken place but they have not affected uh, the, the protein or morphological character. So there are different kind of mutations for academic purpose. You can always try to define that what exactly has happened that created a typical character or change in the trait that we want. And that's why normally the breeders, they would like to know the genetic basis of the mutation that has taken place in a crop which has been improved. So all these studies are done in the background. Now, so this is all in the background, but what a breeder is looking at as the expression at the trait level. What is happening to the actual thing that you want in terms of, there are several traits. And as I told you earlier also, there are qualitative traits and quantitative traits. And I told you the qualitative traits are actually controlled by one or two genes which are easy to manipulate, and they normally follow the Mendelian principles of inheritance, the three laws of Mendelian genetics which I told you. And which depends I mean, qualitative traits includes, for example, plant stature, flowering time, kernel size, flower and leaf colors, shell thickness, amino acid content. Many of these things are controlled by one or two genes and therefore uh, called as qualitative traits. Uh, Sometimes, traits are so complex that it's very difficult to for breeders to know, and they are very difficult to even get hands-on and get real changes uh, in the in the plant material after mutation. So you have to do several back crosses to get these quantitative traits. They are characterized by continuous variation or normal frequency distribution progeny. So, you will find that qualitative traits vary from, they are not discrete like, color of the flower, whether it is purple or white, or, you know, the type of seed, whether it is green seed coat or yellow seed coat. It may be, for example, yield. So yield may be varying from one plant to another, or the height of the plant may also vary from mutated one mutation to another. So you may have quantitative traits, uh, which can be, if you are lucky, if they are controlled by 4 or 5 genes, but there may be many more genes when they are called polygenic quantitative traits, may be found together. If you are again lucky, you may have it on a quantitative trait loci. That means they are, present at a single place in a single chromosome. But many times they may not be having a single locus. They may be there in one or two different chromosomes, and then it is very difficult to actually carry out these experiments and know, how to go forward. Net effects of each gene can be uh, partitioned into components like additive, dominant, epistatic. Um, Normally, so it is the net effect is controlled by genotype and environment interaction that I told you. So, uh, some of the quantitative traits are grain yield, seed weight, panicle weight, stem diameter, plant height, and seed quality. Many of the seed quality parameters, for example, how much of the nutrition it has, how much of the uh, kind of amino acid or protein levels, or some of the nutrients which may be present in seed, are all quantitative traits. Now, through mutation breeding, there have been several examples. And first, I'll give you the examples which are very famous internationally. So, this is, for example, they have a mutant which was rust resistance. Rust is a very important and very destructive disease of wheat. Uh, and this UG99, which is actually detected a single gene mutation from Uganda. Uh, this has been a big problem, and now we have mutant varieties which were discovered, and which, um, 13 resistant advanced mutant lines were developed in wheat varieties. And in February 2014, the first mutant wheat variety resistant to UG19 was officially released to farmers. So this is one example of a uh, you know mutation breeding program which has been very successful. Then improvement of quantitative traits in sorghum. Arid cultivars are tall, late maturing, photosensitive, and possess low harvest indices. To improve the locally adapted land races for food and fodder qualities, biotic and abiotic stress tolerance, there are genetic uh, improvement program which was carried out under the aegis of IAEA, and it has been very successful in case of sorghum. Similarly, in vitro mutagenesis for banana mutation induction has been very successful. Sugarcane improvement through in vitro mutagenesis. Also, in case of melon, uh, there has been successful mutation breeding which has been carried out. Internationally, there have been, almost every country is having a radiation mutagenesis program, and we can have, we know here, just, if you look at the countries, China is having the largest number of mutants. 10 top countries, China has 817 mutants, Japan 479, India has 341, Russian Federation 216, Netherlands 176, Germany 171, US 139, Bulgaria 76, and so on. And the top 10 crop varieties which have been developed through mutation breeding include rice 852, barley 306, chrysanthemum 285, wheat 265, soybean 181, maize, groundnut, rose, and so on. I think there are several uh, mutant varieties which have been uh, developed uh, all around. And there are, uh, if you are looking at the percentage of crop mutants registered, this is from FAO IAEA data. You see largest number you can see are rice, for example, 38%, barley 14%. Uh, then we have, cotton, beans, groundnut, maize, soybean, wheat, chrysanthemum. So largely rice, wheat, and barley have, mutants which are registered with FAO IAEA. Then in India, you know that we have a very strong mutation breeding program. We also, registered about 28% in rice, 12% in groundnut, chrysanthemum 22, mung bean 7. We have also, black gram mutants. Groundnut is a very strong, uh, crop that we have worked on. So basically, on pulses and oil seeds, we have registered uh, several mut- mutants of improved crop varieties. Uh, these are the mutants which are registered in India, as I already told you. This is all reputation. Now, this is what has been done in Trombe alone. Now, in Trombe, as you know, we have 15 groundnut mutants, soybean 2, mustard 4, sunflower 1, linseed 1, mung bean 8, urad bean 5, pigeon pea 5, cowpea 2, paddy 5, and jute 1. So, till up to 2020, we have 49 Trombe mutant varieties. And just to indicate like what are the major crops and what are the traits which have been approved, and where, which states the seeds have been released for cultivation by farmers. For example, tag 24 or TAG, Trombe Akola groundnut, is a very famous groundnut mutant which was developed in 1992 for Maharashtra, Orissa, Karnataka, West Bengal, and Rajasthan. Now, this is a semi-dwarf, small, dark green, thick leaves, early. That means 95 to 100 days. Earliness is very important trait for any crop variety. High harvest index, high penetrate partitioning percentage, wider adaptability. So this is tag 24. Then 37A is again high yield, smooth pods. This is for Rajasthan, Haryana, Punjab, UP, and others. Then Trombe Urad is again very famous. It's a large seeded urad developed in 1985. Then we have mung bean, which is resistant to powdery mildew. Soybean for Maharashtra, which is early maturing, resistant to bacterial pustule disease. Then mustard for Maharashtra. Again, TG51 groundnut, which is for a number of states in eastern side, for early maturity and large seed size, high shelling index, and then we have rice varieties which have been recently developed for Chhattisgarh with the university there, and these are again semi-dwarf, high yielding, um, and they are really the people of the region have really benefited from it. So this is in nutshell what is there in the mutation breeding and crop improvement program. I would like to thank you all for the patient hearing.